Buenas tardes. Hola. ¿Qué tal?
Cambio inglés.
Okay. Muy buenas tardes con todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this magnificent event. The scenery is extraordinary. The National Theater is going to host here the best ideas to focus better and in which way we can include more people in the next 10 years with economic growth. Let me invite now to be with us at this discussion to the Minister of Finance of Peru, Alonso Segura, who will be right here. A big hand for him. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Welcome. And then let's welcome somebody that we appreciate very much in Peru, Mr. Richard Webb, former president of the Central Bank and director of Dean of the Institute Peru of the University San Martin de Porres, and even a bigger hand because our guests should feel the warmth of Peru, Mr. Mitsuhiro Furusawa, Deputy Managing Director of the IMF. Also, we have with us Mr. Santiago Levy, who is the Deputy President of IIDB. And to close this panel of guests, we started with a lady and we end with a lady so that these men are well surrounded. It is with us Alicia Bárcena. She is an executive secretary of CEPAL. Please be seated. This is going to be a very dynamic panel. We're going to have a first half where we're going to listen to the point of view of our guests regarding this large subject. The large subject that in the last 15 years has given us the chance to help people get out of poverty. The subject is growth and inclusion. And to do it as an exchange with all of us, we are going to hear each one of the presentations regarding the subjects that we're going to address, but we will also ask also the audience to ask questions. And I ask the panel members that at the moment when they know that they think they can complement the views of somebody else, just make a signal to me so that we can have even a richer discussion and closer and friendlier discussion so that we can get a real focus of what we want to do this afternoon. The first round is related to growth and inclusion, the last trends and challenges ahead. Let me start with our guest, our special guest, Mr. Furusawa. If he can tell us about the key factors regarding inclusion in Latin America.
Exactly what was the perspective? Por favor.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to not speak Spanish, but I think there are several key factors, but I'd like to point out just three. The first is the robust economic growth supported by the commodity boom which created a lot of opportunities, a lot of jobs, lift the millions out of poverty and reduce the inequality. But not only those favorable external conditions, the second is the macroeconomic stability. I think that many Latin American countries adopted the sound macroeconomic policy, including the sustainable fiscal policy and price stability. Those contributed a lot to reduce the poverty and the inequality. And the third is the well-targeted, well-designed, innovative social policies, like the conditional cash transfer program, which were adopted in many Latin American countries. So those factors contributed a lot to the reduction of the poverty and inequality. And I think it was quite successful.
En el mismo sentido, quisiera hacerle la pregunta a nuestro ministro de Economía, partiendo de la premisa de...
In the same sense, I would like to ask our Minister of Finance, include to grow or grow to include? Because many of us ask ourselves about that this possibility changes according to the perspective that one may have according to the social programs and economic trends of each country. Thank you, Monica, and I think that this has been included in the response that I was giving as three factors were mentioned. The first one are the favorable macroeconomic conditions in the region. Second, the good management of macroeconomic policies, that this also gave us a strategy to grow, which is crecer. But the other important point is to include the people in order to grow, which is the social policy. In the administration of President Ollanta, we have had all the time. The one that was needed some fine-tuning is this inverse possibility, which is key because of two reasons. First, because it allows you to reach the most vulnerable populations, and the growth strategy to reduce poverty may work better for segments that are closer to leaving poverty, but for extreme poverty it's very difficult. They're very, very vulnerable and remote populations. And the second is the direction of causality of growth in a context like the one Latin America and the world is living has weakened because of the current situation. So it is key and it is timely that the government gave all this articulation that sponsored all the social programs that to allow you to continue decreasing poverty and extreme poverty. And there's a third element. In the case of Peru, we have reduced poverty at the same time that inequality. This policy should also allow you to have a more fair growth. Mr. Santiago Levy, regarding the financial inclusion, because it's important, the social programs are important, but even more important than this is to include them within the system, not only in the labor system, but also in the financial sector. Could you elaborate on this approach? Thank you very much, Monica, but let me first thank the IMF for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. As a fact, I would put the inclusion in social things even before inclusion in financial things. I think that the key factor in Latin America is the labor market. The mechanism that segments the population the most in Latin America is the labor market that segments for as a region as a whole to more than 50% of the population in something that we call informal and the other 50% that we call formal. Let's think of a male person that studied till the third grade of middle school, and two, the same people with the same schooling, one ends up in a formal employment and the other one in an informal. One has the right to a pension and to retirement and to health services, and the other one doesn't. Well, we have a situation in the society that where we give asymmetric benefits, we will have segmented societies, and that limits a lot to the access to financial services. The challenge that Latin America has to have growth with social inclusion needs to have great reforms so that it may include all the workers in the same social system and benefits, and give them opportunities that nowadays they don't have. Mr. Richard Webb, could you address the legal framework, because it's important that the labor opportunities, working opportunities in a world where there is a large percentage of informality, but sometimes the legal framework makes other countries make this process much faster than in others. What do you think about this framework? Well, the special thing that we can observe in the Peruvian case, and in a degree, we have mentioned a lot Latin America, but most Peru has been an extraordinary development of the groups with the lowest income, that are mostly farmers or informal workers in the cities. The degree of inclusion that has taken place has been greater there than the improvement of the people in the higher levels of society and the formal level. The data is quite convincing. The statistics in the last year in the last 10 years and a little further tells us that a phenomena has taken place that does not feed clearly in all the explanations and theories that are current, that the main development has taken in the lowest level, and especially because of self-employment. The productivity of the people has increased, of the little farmer and also of the informal worker in the cities. So I think that to think with a forward thinking how to maintain this and secure its continuity, we should try to understand better how what has taken place took place. This is my recommendation. And what is missing to continue and to be even better. And in the case of the different countries, Mrs. Bárcena, what has been the optimum work done by some and not of so much quality done by others, so that we may have a difference in the growth between some and the others? Because Latin America has had a good decade in terms of economic growth, but some work better than the others. First of all, let me thank the invitation. Thank you very much. I would like to say that we have to differentiate several things. It's not the same thing, poverty, than inequality. Latin America and the Caribbean has made a good progress in diminishing poverty in a very important way. We have measured since 1990 till 2015 the compliance of the Millennium Development goals. So we have dropped poverty in almost 20 percentage points. There has been a great commitment of the countries to focus on this, and extreme poverty from 22% to 12%. A great effort. How have they managed? First, we have to see that there are three different realities: the Caribbean, Central America, and Mexico, and South America. The 90s was a decade of focusing in the most vulnerable groups, and that was done by programs of condition transfers that were very successful in Latin America, starting Brazil, Mexico. Peru has its own program. Almost every country had this program of condition transfer that is to direct fiscal efforts towards the poorest families. This empowered in an important way women. They also gave them a greater lot of work, but they were empowered, and this helped very much to leave extreme poverty. I think that the best thing in terms of social terms took place between 2000 2003. That is the booming more in South America, Central America, and Mexico. In South America, because of the increase in the price of commodities, and this was the key to fight extreme poverty and unemployment. And let's hope that the new jobs was decent jobs with all the benefits. We state from CEPAL that we think we should do some work on equality, because equality in ECLAC, in ECLAC, is not only how to have the people leave poverty, but also how to distribute better the revenues. Inequality is manifested in the manifestation in a very few hands to have the concentration of revenues, and it is there that the Minister of Finances are so relevant, because not all the social things is played in the social things. That besides the social programs, we need the economy to be at the service to redistribute the revenues through fiscal policies. And that is what the region did during the booming stage. Some people say that we didn't do all our work. We have a different standpoint. We didn't do everything we could do in terms of productive diversification, but we made great social advances. This region took out 70 million out of poverty, and that means that these people changed their expectation. This is a civilization's advance. They have a better access to consumption and other things. The problem now, and probably we'll be talking in the second half, is how are we going to do so that this social progress doesn't relapse. So let's see how this affects growth. But let me ask Mr. Furusawa if the financial question is really articulated with a sustainable growth.
The financial inclusion is very, very important, I think. Plays the key role for the sustainable growth. I think that our financial inclusion and the financial development is the financing constraint, and facilitate the investment in the human capital, and also boost the business chance, business competition, which lead to the robust economic growth. And also, I think that the Latin American countries has made a lot of efforts to develop their financial system, which contributed a lot of the growth and the social inclusion, and boosting the access of the financial services. Still, I think there's a lot
Challenges.
Challenges to be done. If you look at the other region, maybe the Latin American region still continue to lag behind the other region in the broader development of the financial system, especially the financial market. So it is quite useful to develop the bond market and the equity market that contribute the broader development of the financial system, which accelerate the access of the financing. Yeah.
Y un poco para los...
And for the Peruvians of this panel, Mr. Webb and the Minister of Economy, starting in Peru and the rest of Latin America, what are the challenges for the next 5 years so that in Peru and in Latin American countries, there will be a better growth and reduction of informality, and to focus more on productive programs and less on social programs, because that could be the vision of some economists, right? Any of you? I think that we must understand that these social programs have been articulated, in the case of Peru at least, based on the life cycle, and they reach a stage of maturity. And now I'll talk as a minister. If we see the budget for 2016, we see the growth of the budget in social programs. And the question is why? And the reason is because they reach a point of equilibrium. And in the ideal world, as we continue reducing poverty, you start distributing it to the different populations. And these are programs that seek to create capacities together with the conditional transfer programs, for instance, involved with health and education, or to generate productive capabilities. So I think that we should have that clear in our minds. It's fundamental, that causality, but at the same time we have the other side. The other side is a big challenge. How do we continue not only growing, but within an external context which is difficult? And I think nobody can say that in contrast with 2010 we will see a rebound of 100% of the price of copper or 50% in the price of gold. I don't think that will happen. So what we face now is a more complex, a medium-term scenario with monetary policies that will go backwards. We won't have a president of Federal Reserve doing exactly the same, quite the opposite. It will be a lift-off of the rate of interest. So we will have to go against the wind. And so what to do in order to achieve that potential growth of the economy? First of all, to go back to that potential, because the economies of Latin America, most of them are growing below their capacity because of all these winds against it. And then how to increase that capability. And what Santiago was mentioning is quite valid. We have to improve the productivity in the economy. And how do we improve the productivity in the economy? Well, the production actors should be more productive. But how? Well, with labor reforms, for instance. We need a labor market that does not segment. And that's one of the pieces of the puzzle which is very important. So labor reforms, starting in Peru and in contrast with other Latin American countries, are very rigid, much more than in other countries of the region. And that affects us somehow. Yes, I'm convinced of what Santiago said regarding that. But when I think of the inclusion as a priority, I'm not thinking about the workers who might benefit with labor reforms, but rather I'm thinking that in Peru we still have 30% of the population that lives off small farming. So these labor regulations have little to do with their life. So what will increase the income of those families? many people are now starting to work in related things because there is a farming development right now with a lot of transportation, a lot of trade, and many people work on that, and that's how they improve. So all that is productive. It's not so much a matter of laws, but it is supported by the infrastructure and by basic services. Roads, telephone, electric power, water, all this infrastructure, which is basic infrastructure, I think has been key to what has been achieved, to this rural takeoff that we've had in the last 20 years. And the same thing has happened in neighboring countries, in Bolivia, Ecuador especially, where they also have large indigenous populations that are lagging behind based on farming. And for them, those are the basic actors. Let me add a couple of things. First of all, you have to improve the opportunities for the population, policies to improve the human capital, educational reforms. You have to incorporate rural segments basically into the market. That's investment in infrastructure that is also being done. You spoke about farming. You have to open markets for farmers. And those are trade agreements, which is something that we've also been doing. And finally, you have to find ways to generate a broader fan of productive activities in the country. And there are other strategies for that. For instance, the productive diversification plan. So a fan of strategies that aim at the same objective. And Mrs. Barcelona said that it's not the same thing to reduce poverty than focusing on inequality. So, Mr. Furusawa, what options are being suggested by the fund to reduce inequality?
First, there are the macroeconomic stability to boost the growth. This is the most important thing.
Yeah.
But also there are several measures. For example, the tax policy to reduce the inequalities or the inequalities to make the tax more progressive, and maybe the change reform of the threshold to reduce or eliminate the tax burden of the low-income earners. So I think there are several measures to reduce the inequality.
Yo quisiera hacer solamente un minuto una indicación.
I would like to say that we have a hashtag for those of you who have your cell phones. I haven't asked you to turn them off, quite the opposite. Activate them so that we can start working on the questions and comments on this discussion. The hashtag is hashtag EnfoqueLatam. And in a few more minutes, please prepare your questions because we will also give you the opportunity to raise your hand and ask your questions and tell us who your questions are addressed to. So let's move to gender, which I think is a very important topic because inequality is closely related to gender. And I would like to start with Mr. Levy and Mrs. Barcelona. I think they have some comments about that. In terms of gender, there are many opportunities for the region. Some interesting data. The rate of participation of women in the labor market in most of the Latin American countries is below the average of OECD countries, but Peru is an exception. Peru has a share of women above that of the OECD. It has the highest participation of women in Latin America. But leaving aside Peru, the region as a whole has lots of opportunities because the inclusion of more women in the labor market, of course, helps growth, but is also an equalizing factor. The second element to be taken into account is that in the bank or in the IDB, We've done many studies with statistics. You take a man and a woman, exactly the same age, the same years of schooling, the same experience, the same characteristics, the same job, and in average, what we find is that the woman earns 14% less than the man. So considering the insertion conditions, you gain in productivity and equality. And proportionally, there are more informal women than informal men. If we did labor market reforms of standardizing the rights unrelated to labor conditions, reformulating financing conditions, you equalize the participation of women and men, regardless of whether they get in or go out of the market. They would continue accumulating for the pension and would continue to have a right to medical insurance, unemployment insurance, regardless of any interruption. And that is obtained through a political agreement. It sounds fine, but it's very difficult. Not necessarily. You have to realize that this is an option, a win-win option, because you will obtain more productivity. Today, unfortunately, we're seeing a waste of the talent of 50% of the population that does not participate in the labor market under equal conditions because we have many regulations and rules that make it very difficult. It does require a national effort and a national agreement, considering that is very promising in order to improve inclusion. But it's not impossible. If we see, for instance, what happens in the Nordic countries, it requires an important effort to equalize the conditions. For instance, to put kindergartens, to give men some time when the woman gives birth, to distribute more equitably the tasks at home. Sometimes you punish the second job, but it's not impossible. And the important thing here is to realize that there is a space for that. I insist that this is a win-win option. And if we think of social inclusion and equity at the same time, very few roads promise so much as this one. Let me continue along the same lines as Santiago, because what we've seen is that is fundamental in the case of gender to grant 3 autonomies to women. Economic autonomy, because we've shown in some studies of ECLAC where we've seen that if women were to have the same payment for the same type of job, equal salary for the same job, and if they had the same access to the labor markets as women, only that, just matching opportunities and salary, we would reduce poverty in 1% points in Argentina to 12% points in El Salvador, 15% points in Bolivia. So poverty would be reduced. So access to jobs by women is very important. However, we have to get to another relevant point. 1 of every 3 women don't have their own income. In other words, despite the fact that we've obtained educational parity, not only parity, but today women are much better educated and prepared than men in primary, secondary, and higher education. But this is not reflected in the labor market. So what happens? Many women who have studies stay at home. And there's no care economy. They stay taking care of children, their parents, the elderly, and they have no income. And that detracts from their autonomy, from their possibility of having an income. And the political autonomy, which is also means how to get to decision-making positions in the private enterprise, we've seen that women don't have access to high positions. Only 8% of women, of the managers of large companies are women. In the political arena, the same thing. We have women in the Congress. They make decisions, but only few. And then in the physical autonomy as well, the violence against women and sexual and reproductive health. How can you combine production and reproduction? So what's the proposal? Before I lose the idea, because we are in Peru, and here we have the Minister, Paola Bustamante, whom I would like to greet, Tarsila Rivera, a good friend from the indigenous peoples, and Minister Segura. Here in Peru on the 2nd of November, the 1st and the 2nd of November, we're going to have the first forum of Ministers of Social Development, the first one to be held. And the Ministers of Social Development will come here to Peru, convened by the Peruvian government and ECLAC and UNDP. And we are going to have this meeting where, and by the way, we hope the Minister of Segura will participate, to analyze what can be those factors that can help for something which is also very important, the labor productive equalizing link. And women can take advantage of everything. I just heard that, so I think it's great. So a big hand for her. Yes, we have to take advantage of all the possibilities. I have everybody here, so I'm taking advantage of that. But the important thing here is to see from the point of view of all the panel members, what can we do to finish with this inequality? In Peru, for instance, many years ago, we had the quotas in Congress that generates a lot of discussion on the topic, but somehow it has helped to have a greater presence of women in Congress. But how can this be transferred to inclusion programs, to the backup that women can give to microfinance, which is where many of you are working very actively. The Minister of Economy could say something about that, because it's also in your field. Yes. In the case of Peru, I think that we are one of the countries that has at least we have economic equality, we have less differences in the participation of women in the labor market. It is similar to that of men, if not greater, although income is lower. I think that we have been able to make more progress than other countries. And in your social programs, yes, basically they are handled by women. And that's why they say that here men work less. Now, I don't know if it's true, but that's what they say. So I think that we always need to design policies that, of course, they are in the hands of the Ministry of Economy, but to see how to reduce any type of disadvantage that they might have because of violence or because of economic reasons. But once again, I think that in Peru we have made progress. We have made a lot of progress. This issue of quotas in Congress, the legal framework that we have they promoted the reduction of this gender inequality? I don't know, but I think that it's not good to establish any type of quota. I think that we should find other type of incentives and mechanisms to reduce these gaps. But the good thing is that in Peru they are smaller than in other places. There's a ghost speaking to us from the back, but Mr. Furusawa might give us an analysis from the point of view of the IMF about microfinance that falls upon women in Latin America.
I'm a strong advocate of the gender equality.
We're with you. We are with you.
Not because my wife is there hearing this.
Oh, okay.
But I really think that the gender equality improve the efficiency of the economy. The analysis says that the eliminating the gender gap increased the GDP 5% in the United States, 9% in Japan, and per capita income 70% in Latin American countries. So I think the eliminating the gender gap is very, very important. It's not a question of the only Latin American region. In my native country, in Japan, the strengthening the woman labor force participation is one of the key policy of the Abenomics, which aim to boost the Japanese economy. And especially it is very important for like those countries who are facing the shrinking of the labor force. And the government took the several measures to increase the child care facilities and expand the child care leave benefit, and even set the target of 30% of women in leadership position. It's not the legal. It's not the obligation that the company is recommended to increase the women executives, and those policies, because thanks to those policies, millions of women enter the labor force, and in the past 2 years, and raised women force participation to 3%.
A question by Mr. Contreras.
Seguir hablando desde aquí. Ahora sí.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we have a question from Javier Contreras. Doesn't say who it's addressed to, but I suggest that Mrs. Bárcena? Okay. My eyeglasses are not good. A few days ago, ECLAC said that we would grow at 7%. Is that true? Well, we foresee an important slowdown for the whole region. We've corrected our figures downwards, just like the IMF and the World Bank. For the region, we estimate a growth of minus 0.3% for 2015 and about 0.7% for 2016. In the concrete case of 2.7 that he mentions, it's because, well, by the way, the drop in the commodities has had important impacts, especially in America, but also a drop in global demand. We're still a region that depends a lot on the external context. And that's why the drop in demand worldwide, especially from Europe and China, we see that the figures of growth in China are going downwards. And China is one of the big buyers of our commodities, a drop in the price of copper and ores in general, and the demand. I think that's very important. And I believe that's what explains this drop. And let me say something else. In the future, and we've discussed this this morning, what can we do in this juncture where there is a general slowdown, especially in South America? Not in Central America and Mexico, not as strong as in South America. Central America is growing above 4%. They are more related to the U.S. economy that is booming. But what do we recommend? It's true that we have to make adjustments. All the countries are restraining their expenditure, their public expenditure, the public finance. We believe, and Luis Alberto Moreno said it today, we have to make a smart adjustment with the social sensitivity. We do believe it's good that in Peru maybe you don't need conditional transfer so much, but in other countries they do. We see that the conditional transfer program is still very important to support the most vulnerable groups and has a cost of no more than 0.4% of the GDP of the region. It's not so expensive to support 124 million people. And number two, we should visualize more clearly the demography of our region. Each country has different demographics. Chile, for instance, is a more aging country, but not Peru. Peru does not have such an aging population. So we should invest in the youth, that population that is coming, because our region is going to age. We are going to be an aged region. 2035, the demographic bond will end for the region, and we have to invest And I think that this relationship between education and work is very important. Today, we have to increase the productivity. It's not only based on labor contraction, in other words, being more strict in the labor aspect, which is necessary. The other fundamental aspect is technology. Peru, in my opinion, is a country that has grown impressively in technology. It's the country that has more digital connectivity in the region. There are more cell phones in Peru than inhabitants or than households. It's true. It's true. But that reach out to the rural regions. Somebody said that in the rural regions, the technology has really reached there. And with the digital telephony, we have the banking systems getting to those places, and that helps social inclusion. And Monica, you mentioned the importance of a financial inclusion. So I have great hopes that the digital economy will penetrate more deeply in our region and will cover all the sectors and will help us find new ways of producing, because that's what we really need. I wanted to supplement something. Regarding connectivity, it's true. Peru is having a large level of connection. We are launching fiber optics to all the provinces in many regions. It's very important to allow people to communicate, because that's a way of transferring information and allowing them to grow in terms of human capital. And something else. It's not that conditional transfers are not important here. They are fundamental. What I said was that they are reaching a point of equilibrium. They don't have to keep on growing like before. At the beginning, we started doing it very intensively, but not so much now.
Let me tell you something related to what Mr. Segura said. Sometimes there's a confusion when we talk about social programs, and there is lack of precision between the conditional cash transfer programs targeting a small group of the population and those who live in extreme poverty. Moderated poverty, as Alicia said, can cost an average for Latin America half a point of the GDP, and if they are well targeted to those group of the families, they reach a point, as the minister said, where there's no need to grow, there's no need to dismantle them. But these are programs that are trying to invest in human capital of the poor families, and they do not represent most of the social spending in our countries, although a lot of attention has been paid to them. Most of the social spending takes place in terms of pension and healthcare. And that spending usually is extremely unequal. Adding education to this. Yes, I am putting education separately because education is different to pension and healthcare, and it's good that you have raised this, Monica. The children of a formal worker and the children of an informal worker go to the same public school, and there's no discrimination whatsoever. The children of a formal worker and the children of an informal worker do not go to the same health clinic. So what we see there is an exclusion. And my point here is that where we have the strongest spending is on the pension systems and on the health systems, not on the half point that we spent on conditional transfers, but on the 3 or 4 points that we spent on subsidizing the pension systems. And they are reaching 30 or 40% of the population only, with resources from all the population and the taxes from all of the population. And these are factors that generate inequality, also in terms of health. If we truly want to have social policies that foster equity and equality, we need to think about social policies in terms of health and pension that have a much greater coverage than the one they currently have. And that is where the future challenges lie, because as Alicia pointed out, as a region we are aging, and the epidemiological shift towards more expensive, more complex and costly diseases will make the health expenditure to grow. Most of the countries of OECD spend 7, 8, 9% of the GDP in health. In the US, they spend 15%. In Latin America, we're going to spend more. The question is whether we are going to do this in an equitable equitable and inclusive manner, or in a way in which we will segment other people. The same applies to health and pensions. I would like to make a quick comment, Monica. I think that the region needs to invest on a critical issue, which is preventing teen pregnancy, before we leave aside the topic of women. Teen pregnancy among poor families, because the wealthy families, the higher class families, do not want to have any more children. The fertility rate of Latin America is 2.6, 2.4%, in some countries, even less. But the problem is found in the poor households, in the rural households, in indigenous households, where women under 15 already had their first child. And this is an issue that has to do with sexual and reproductive health. I would focus extensively on that. Perhaps Mr. Richard Webb and Mr. Furusawa, if they can add something to our debate, so we can give them the chance to add something or complement to what we have been saying so far.
External condition, the situation will change. It is important to adjust the policy, but it should be adjusted very growth-friendly manner. We should not cut completely the expenditure which is necessary, but rather to increase the efficiency of the budget execution. And I think that the basic social spending should be maintained. It is, and social care should be maintained, because it is very important to the stability, the social and political and economic stability of the society. Yeah. But of course, we should adjust. We should adjust the budget and the policy because of the change of the external situation.
Well, there is a question that we asked at the beginning of our panel, but I will repeat it because it comes from Rocio Avila, which is including to grow, or growing to include. This is a debate that usually takes place in the economic arena, but to that, I would like to add the following. How come, at least in Peru, which is the place I am more familiarized with, how can we tend to reduce the issue of informality? Because in that way, we are able to broaden or expand the opportunities of employment and better productive programs, which are, in the end, a true social inclusion program. Mr. Webb? When I hear the comments and the questions, I feel very much in agreement with the proposals that are being made. But at the same time, I believe that we should take into account that in order to oversimplify, but the starting point for any discussion around inclusion and reducing inequality, any discussion should start with the fact that we are still almost like two countries here. Half is looking upwards and the other one is looking downwards. And much of what we discuss, perhaps way too much, in my opinion, is a concern of how to fix things on the top part of the population so we can organize our house, the house where we live. But many times, those are not the priorities for the population who are below that line. So if we go back to the question on inequality, and I don't know if it has to do with this question, it's a broad question. For the bottom part, this has to do with a productive issue and not a welfare issue. It is more productive in nature. Things that help them produce more, because the only way in the long run to reduce inequality of the entire country will be by lifting or raising this bottom half. And we need to help them by producing more, not only by helping them through some social programs, which are very well designed. I believe that we should maintain them. But even more important is to increase productivity. And that has to do with more general aspects, such as communications, roads, but also it has to do with governance. Yes, it has to do with governance. Actually, I will start by answering the question about growing to include or including to grow. The problem is, how do we ask this question? Because it has been poorly drafted. It is growing for inclusion and including for growth, because they complement each other, and this has been the idea behind the proposals of this government. They are complementary. They do not compete against each other. And based on your question, Monica, and I fully agree with Richard in that regard, we need to work to include all the population. But this is what we have been doing. And I would like to go back to my answer to the first question you asked. Education, investment in human capital, because we want all Peruvian citizens to have the same opportunities. And in terms of education, there's a strong investment component in rural schools. Infrastructure, this administration has invested significantly in rural areas, and we can see the results in rural sanitation, for instance, which are impressive in electrification and also in roads, which is something you need. You need the services to reach the population. This will generate better productive capacity in the population. You will have population who knows how to read, who knows how to write well, and it will raise other levels of education so it can have a curriculum more suitable to current times. We can introduce English curriculums in the public schools, among others. Then we have the other strategies, productive strategies, more straightforward strategies, which is to open the array of the country's productive matrix. This goes hand in hand with the social policy, but we are actually working on that in order to have a country where we are all equal. Nobody disregards the effort made by the national government in social programs and in the bet for education, but the question and the reflection of Mr. Webb continues to have a lot of substance, because it talks about a fracture of what is done from the half up and what is done from half down. And this is something we can all talk about. I would like to make a brief comment there, Monica. What I'm actually mentioning is to have a higher incidence in the half bottom. Do you agree with that answer, Mr. Webb? I fully agree. Over the last 10 and 20 years, there has been a multiplication in the effort made by the government on the top bottom, on the half bottom. Before, we didn't have those kind of people. We didn't do much at that level. Now we see a shift of budget, a huge shift of budget. It has become much more visible, but also what has had a huge impact has been the decentralization, because now a huge budget is transferred to local and regional governments. And although this is criticized by everybody, always, that they do not know how to spend the money, there's a lot of corruption, but if you travel inside the country, you can see that now the roads have multiplied, especially the dirt roads, the small roads. Before, the central government didn't do much in that area. Why should we build a road from this hill to this other hill, from this mountain to this other mountain if that is a remote area and there's no traffic. But when you give them the money, they will build the roads. We only have 6 minutes left. There is one question which comes from Brian Gutierrez, and then from the audience, I would take 1 or 2 questions, no more, because it will not be possible. Brian Gutierrez, how to sustain the social inclusion model that we have within a context of a drop in the prices of raw materials? I would ask one of you to answer that question. And let's see. The gentleman over here, the gentleman over there. So we have 3 questions. We are going to take 3 more questions. Mr. Levy? I was democratically chosen by my colleagues. In essence, I believe that not only Peru, and this is a general observation for Latin America, we as societies cannot rest the redistributive effort in the income from natural resources. The income of natural resources is cyclical, and overall, those income, since they are transitory, we would like to use them for infrastructure and the other alternative mentioned by Minister Segura. And the redistributive effort needs to go on the fiscal side. The gentleman over there. I have a very brief question. How can we raise the savings in Latin America, which I understand is very low compared to Asia? To save time, one of you can answer this question, but we are going to take a couple more questions and you can take note of the questions. Who was the second person who can ask the question? The gentleman over there, and then the lady over here, and the gentleman on the back. Only 4 questions. Good afternoon, David Salazar from Apurímac. OECD has gaps in terms of the country who are still not part of this group of developed countries. Peru above the average of OECD in terms of macroeconomic stability is over 19 points, but in terms of human development, less than 15%. Ms. Bárcena, Mr. Levy referred to inequality. They referred to the parameters of OECD. And I want to ask, the 34 countries of OECD, how can they, most of them have been able to reduce these gaps through financing. So for a country to overcome those gaps of malnutrition, anemia, low quality education, poor infrastructure, can they also resort to financing and not only wait for their own resources? The third question from the gentleman on the back and the lady here. I know it's a little bit authoritarian, but time is a tyrant. Very quickly, please. Sorry, the microphone is not on. We cannot hear the question. Sorry, we cannot hear the question in the translation booth. Okay, the question, please. We will have to organize a different panel to give you a full answer, but we will give you an overall idea. We only have 1 minute left. Your question, please. Good afternoon. I want to take advantage of this opportunity to salute our colleague, Ms. Ana Bárcena, because she has supported and provided valuable recommendations around the rights of indigenous people. And I would like to make a call so all the members of the panel can look at the document and can also consider it in their analysis. My question is, what do you propose to achieve equality in terms of indigenous people? So this is part of the social inclusion policies, considering that the territory of indigenous peoples face different kinds of threats. If you have a capacity of synthesis in one sentence, if you can answer each of these questions, that would be great, because I know that Mr. Furusawa needs to leave. Can we choose? Yes, let me choose then. Let me start with the first two questions. The level of saving. It is true, the level of the domestic level of saving in Latin America is lower than Asia. In Peru, it has been going up. It is significantly greater than in the past 20 years. So if we want to reach the Asian levels, then we will have to import some Asian people, because it's a completely different idiosyncrasy. So Mr. Furusawa can stay with us longer. In terms of OECD, we need to improve governance. We need to establish it in the country. That is why we have a country program with OECD. Yesterday, they presented the diagnosis of the first study, the first stage of the multidimensional country program, and it tackles many of the issues we are addressing. The second stage, the policy proposal, addresses three topics: productivity, informality, and inequality, which are the topics we need to address. Very quickly, please. I want to say that for us, the main dilemma is complementary to grow for inclusion and inclusion for growth. This, I would like to refer to the last intervention of the representative of indigenous people. Governance. Governance also includes governance of natural resources and of the territory. The territory matters, and inequalities also reflect themselves in the territory. Therefore, we need to see how can we bring the population closer to the territory, how can we redistribute resources, and governance of natural resources is of the essence. Peru is a country rich in natural resources. We need to change the equation, state, market, or society. Not all the market, not all the state, and there needs to be more citizen participation. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to join you here today. Thank you very much to the members of the panel. And please, I hope you continue having a pleasant stay in our country. We are very happy to have you here. Thank you.